April 12, 1945, near Eisenach, Germany. A cold, biting spring rain swept relentlessly across the churned-up fields surrounding a hastily constructed prisoner-of-war enclosure on the outskirts of a bombed-out Luftwaffe airfield. The skeletal remains of destroyed Messerschmitt fighters and Junkers bombers lay scattered across the landscape like the bones of fallen giants, their blackened fuselages twisted and half-buried in the thick, sucking mud. Puddles of oily water reflected the gray, oppressive sky above. The war in Europe was clearly in its final, agonizing death throes. Anyone with eyes and ears could sense it. The distant rumble of American artillery, the constant flow of defeated German columns shuffling westward, and the unmistakable stench of defeat mixed with diesel fuel, wet wool, and cordite hanging heavy in the damp air. More than 600 German prisoners huddled miserably behind a double line of concertina wire reinforced with wooden posts driven deep into the soft ground. Their greatcoats were soaked through, clinging heavily to their thin frames, while their faces appeared gaunt and hollow-eyed after months of desperate retreat, endless bombardment, and dwindling rations. Some were barely more than boys, wide-eyed teenagers pulled straight from the Hitler Youth battalions and thrown into the collapsing front lines. Others were older reservists, tired mechanics, factory workers, and clerks who had been handed rifles when the Reich's manpower finally ran dry. They stood in weary, silent clusters, most of them staring blankly at their mud-caked boots, trying not to draw attention to themselves. American sentries from General George S. Patton's mighty Third Army patrolled the perimeter with steady, confident steps. Their carbines were slung low across their chests, and their boots were caked with the same sticky clay that seemed determined to pull every man downward. A simple hand-painted wooden sign hammered into the ground at the entrance read in bold black letters, "Enemy prisoner of war enclosure, 3rd U.S. Army." The message was clear and final. Inside the wire, the atmosphere was tense but subdued, until one man broke the pattern of quiet resignation. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Brandt stood defiantly at the very center of the compound, his spine as rigid as a parade ground flagpole on a crisp Berlin morning. His field-gray greatcoat, though heavily spattered with mud and rain, remained meticulously buttoned to the throat. The twin silver oak leaves on his collar caught what little dull light managed to pierce the clouds. A thin, elegant monocle was clamped firmly in his right eye, giving him an air of aristocratic detachment even in captivity. To the casual observer, he still looked every inch the proud Prussian officer who refused to accept that the fatherland's grand destiny had been shattered beyond repair. Beside him, a nervous young captain from his former regiment leaned in and whispered urgently, his voice trembling slightly with fear and exhaustion. "Herr Oberstleutnant, please, perhaps it would be wiser to simply comply. These are Americans. They do not understand our traditions or our sense of honor." Von Brandt did not so much as glance at the man. His gaze remained fixed forward, cold and unyielding. "They are nothing but shopkeepers and mechanics playing at being soldiers," he replied, his voice low yet carrying clearly through the rain. "I will not lower myself by groveling before them like some common criminal." The words sent a visible ripple of unease through the surrounding prisoners. Many edged away instinctively, sensing the dangerous storm brewing around the arrogant lieutenant colonel. They had all heard stories of Patton's legendary temper and the unstoppable momentum of his Third Army. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire. At the main gate, a burly American master sergeant with a voice like gravel stepped inside the enclosure, flanked by two watchful military policemen. "All right, listen up," he barked, his words cutting through the steady patter of rain. "You will be processed one at a time. Single file. Give your name, rank, and unit. Any sidearms, documents, maps, or intelligence materials. Hand them over immediately. We do this quickly, quietly, and without any trouble." Most of the German soldiers began shuffling forward obediently, their shoulders slumped in defeat. But von Brandt remained exactly where he stood, gloved hands clasped tightly behind his back, boots planted firmly in the deepening mud. The sergeant's sharp eyes locked onto him instantly. "You there, officer with the fancy eyepiece. Front and center. Now." Von Brandt slowly removed one leather glove and flicked a smear of mud from his sleeve with deliberate, almost theatrical disdain. He offered no reply. The sergeant took 2 heavy steps closer to the inner wire, his face hardening. "I gave you an order, Colonel." Still, the German officer did not move. The rain drummed loudly on steel helmets and canvas tents. Tension thickened the air like smoke. Finally, the sergeant turned to one of the MPs without breaking eye contact. "Go get the general. Tell him we've got a problem." The MP nodded and broke into a jog toward the cluster of olive-drab command tents pitched along the edge of the ruined runway. Minutes dragged by like hours. The prisoners whispered nervously among themselves. A young Wehrmacht lieutenant standing just behind von Brandt tugged timidly at his sleeve. "Sir, this is not worth the risk. Please." Von Brandt stared straight ahead, motionless, as if he were still reviewing troops on the grand avenues of pre-war Berlin. Then the flap of the largest command tent snapped open violently. A tall, broad-shouldered figure emerged into the rain, helmet pushed back casually on his head, twin ivory-handled Colt .45 revolvers riding low and ready on his hips. Even from a distance, the man's presence was electric, raw energy, absolute confidence, and the unmistakable aura of command. Every American soldier in the compound instinctively straightened their posture. The whispered words spread like wildfire through the German ranks. "Patton." General George S. Patton strode across the muddy ground with long, purposeful steps, as though he owned every inch of the devastated landscape. Rain streamed off the brim of his helmet, but he paid it no mind. Mud splashed against his polished boots with each stride. He pushed through the gate and stopped less than 5 feet from von Brandt. For several long, heavy seconds the two officers simply stared at each other, one the embodiment of American victory and relentless drive, the other the last stubborn symbol of a collapsing Prussian military tradition. Patton was the first to speak, his voice carrying easily across the enclosure. "Which one of you Krauts figures he's still running the damn show around here?" Von Brandt took one deliberate step forward, lifting his chin slightly. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Brandt of the 11th Panzer Division," he announced clearly. "And I demand to be treated with the respect and dignity appropriate to my rank under the rules of civilized warfare." Patton's weathered face remained largely impassive, but those who had served under him for years recognized the subtle signs, the slight tightening of the jaw, the dangerous glint in his eyes. He removed his own gloves with slow, deliberate movements and tucked them into his belt. "You demand respect," Patton repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a challenge. "Well, Colonel, allow me to paint you a very clear picture." He swept one powerful arm toward the eastern horizon, where low clouds met the shattered tree leans and distant smoke plumes. "That direction is Berlin. My tanks and my men have been driving hard toward it day and night, smashing through everything your high command threw in our way, while your once proud army has been running in the opposite direction like a pack of scared rabbits. You are no longer in the Wehrmacht, Colonel. You are standing inside an American prisoner cage, under American rules." Von Brandt's monocle caught a flash of dull light. "The Geneva Convention clearly states." Patton cut him off sharply. "The Geneva Convention guarantees you food, shelter, and medical attention. It does not give you the right to give orders to my sergeants or stand there pretending you're still commanding a parade ground." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its steel. "You lost, Colonel. Your vaunted panzers are burned-out hulks. Your Luftwaffe is gone, nothing but smoking wreckage. Your Führer is cowering in a bunker somewhere, wondering how his 1,000-year Reich collapsed so quickly. And yet here you are, still demanding respect as if the war hasn't already been decided." A ripple of low, nervous laughter spread among the American guards. Von Brandt's face flushed with anger, but he refused to look away. "I remain an officer of the German army," he replied stiffly. "I will not allow myself to be herded like common enlisted men." Patton studied the defiant German for a long moment, then suddenly let out a short, sharp bark of laughter that cut through the rain like a whip. "Well, that's a new one on me, boys," he called over his shoulder to the master sergeant. "Did you hear that? The colonel here refuses to be spoken to like a private soldier." Turning back to von Brandt, he stepped even closer until they were nearly face to face. "Son, right now the only rank that matters inside this wire is mine. You will step forward when you are told. You will answer when you are asked. And you will do it with the same discipline your own army used to demand, before it all fell apart around you." Pride and cold reality battled visibly across von Brandt's features. Around them, more than 600 men held their collective breath. Patton glanced briefly at his watch, then fixed his gaze back on the German officer. "You have exactly 10 seconds to decide whether you walk to that processing table under your own power or whether my men carry you there. The choice is yours, Colonel." The rain intensified, pounding harder against helmets and shoulders. 1 second passed. 2. A droplet of water slid down von Brandt's monocle, blurring his vision. 3. 4. The young captain behind him looked on the verge of fainting from anxiety. 5. 6. Patton's steely eyes never blinked. 7. 8. Von Brandt's rigid shoulders sagged by the smallest fraction of an inch. 9. At the count of 10, the German officer slowly reached up and removed the monocle with careful, almost ceremonial dignity. He slipped it into his coat pocket. Then, without another word, He began walking forward through the thick mud toward the processing table. There was no fanfare, no final protest. Only the wet, heavy sound of boots sinking into the mire and the quiet, unmistakable surrender of a man who had finally been forced to confront the end of his world. The master sergeant opened his clipboard with a sigh of relief. Name: Otto von Brandt. The German answered, his voice now flat and drained of all earlier fire. Rank and last unit: Lieutenant Colonel, 11th Panzer Division. Any weapons, documents, or personal effects to declare? In complete silence, von Brandt emptied his pockets. A worn leather wallet, a silver cigarette case engraved with his family crest, a folded situation map that was now strategically worthless. Finally, almost reluctantly, he placed a monocle on top of the small pile. The MP tied the canvas sack shut and set it aside. Patton remained standing in the center of the compound, watching every movement without comment. Once the formal processing was complete and von Brandt had been directed toward the separate section reserved for captured officers, the general spoke again. Colonel. Von Brandt stopped mid-step and turned slowly to face him. Patton closed the distance once more. This time his tone was quieter, almost reflective, though still carrying the weight of command. You're not the first German officer I've met who tried to cling to the old ways until the very end. Most of your comrades realized the truth long before they reached this cage. In your army, rank was too often about privilege. Who received the best quarters, the softest assignments, the right to look down on everyone beneath them. He gestured toward the American soldiers standing guard with calm confidence. In my army, rank is about responsibility. The heavier the burden, the higher you stand. That is why we are here, marching forward, and why you and your men are standing behind this wire today. For the first time since the confrontation began, von Brandt met Patton's eyes without defiance. All that remained in his expression was profound exhaustion, the kind that settles in when long-held illusions finally shatter. Patton gave a single, curt nod. Get some rest while you can, Colonel. This war is almost over for every last one of us. With that, the general turned smartly on his heel and walked back toward the gate, his ivory-handled revolvers swinging at his sides with each step. The rain continued to fall, transforming the entire enclosure into a shallow brown lake, but the dangerous tension that had gripped the camp had finally broken. Prisoners began speaking again in low voices. The processing line resumed its steady movement. In the distance, another long column of freshly captured German soldiers was already being marched up the muddy road from the east under heavy guard. Patton paused briefly at the gate and glanced back over his shoulder one final time. Across the compound, Otto von Brandt now stood quietly among the other captured officers. No monocle, no demands, no lingering arrogance. He was simply another defeated soldier waiting for whatever fate the coming days would bring. A small, satisfied smile touched the corner of Patton's mouth. Then he stepped out through the gate into the pouring rain. Behind him, the barbed wire gate slammed shut with a clang, making a heavy sound. The Third Army still had work to do. Berlin and final victory still lay ahead. In this filthy prisoner of war camp on the outskirts of a ruined airfield, yet another stubborn remnant of the once mighty Reich was forced to accept a new reality. George S. Patton once again made sure the lesson was taught clearly and without compromise. The rain continued to fall, relentlessly washing away the blood, mud, and last remnants of pride from the fields of a dying empire, while the unstoppable American columns continued to roll eastward, toward the horizon and toward a victory that now seemed inevitable to all, except for those few who needed one last.